I want us to talk about control flow. I've created this file. It's called flow.js, and this is where we're going to be writing everything here. We've so far looked at switch case, and we understand how switch case is used to control the flow of a program. But there's also, just to sort of define what control flow is first and why it matters. Basically, control flow lets your code basically make decisions and repeat its actions, right? So make decisions and repeat actions. That is the main thing that control flow allows you to do. Without control flow, every script that you write, it's going to be a straight line of statements, right? So for example, imagine just having like multiple prints in like 10 lines and they're just following each other and all that. So without that, you're going to just have multiple of this straight line statements. But when you use control flow, we talk about things such as branching. We also talk about looping at the same time. But in this case, I'd like us to just stick to branching first. Branching is whereby we're talking about using if statements. Also, using switch case is part of branching, but so far, since we've looked at switch case, we're going to talk about if statements. So, if statements and this branching in general, it enables your code to react to different inputs and states that are going to give it based on certain statements. So, let's start with if statements. This is what a simple decision statement looks like. You're going to we use if statements, then if usually accompanied by what you refer to as else if statements and also else statement. I'll just write it here: else if statement and also else statements. Now let's understand all of them in a simple sort of just syntax to show you. So you'll write an if, then you'll have a set of parentheses. In here you're going to have a condition, and after this condition is where you're going to write some logic on what the code, rather what the code is going to do whenever that condition is met, right? So it basically runs when condition is true or condition is truth here. Now should be a u here, like that. Then once you have your if statement, sometimes you just want to have multiple if conditions, right? The same case with switch case, you have multiple conditions at times in case the first condition is not met. That is where the else if comes in. So you just write an else if, then you give it your condition as well. So this is going to be just another condition. So I'll just write here other condition. You have another condition. Then after this, oh okay, need to get rid of this I. After you've had your other condition here, then you can have again braces like that, and you'll continue. Also you'll just have a statement here or some sort of execution that is going to run whenever that other condition is met. Then you can have multiple of these else if statements. You can have as many of them as you'd like, but finally you're going to have an else. So this else block is the one that runs whenever all the other blocks have not been met. So I'll just say runs if all the above is let's just call it falsy, like that. So this is the simple flow of decision statements in JavaScript. And this is just a syntax. So I'm going to comment it out for now, like that, so that we can start writing the actual code and just something simple. So far we've built a grade analyzer, and I'd like us to stick with that. So I'm going to just use a const here, and we're going to have a score. So let's say we just initially define a score to something like 54. Then we can have our if statements, right? So we can assign a student a specific grade based on the score that they had. So we'll say if score, let's say if score is greater than or equal to 90, then whenever a student has 90 or greater than 90, then we're going to just console.log a statement, and we're going to give this student a grade. So let's say we give this student an A plane, right? Then we go ahead and have another condition. So you can just have else if, then you have another condition here. So if the score is greater than or equal to something like 75, then in that case you still need to console.log a statement, and in this case you give the student a B. And I mean it already makes sense as what else you can continue with this, but I'm going to just add another else if here. So you add another condition and you say if the score is greater than or equal to, should be greater than or equal to, let's give it 60. If that is the case, then that means this student, we're going to give them a c dot log. Then we give the student a c plain like that. Then in case any of these conditions are not met, that means the student scored less than 60. Then we're going to have an else block, and this else block is going to just console.log a statement, and we're going to give this student maybe an f, just a fail, basically for fail, like that. So this is how you write your simple decision statements in Python, or rather in JavaScript, using using if, else, if, and everything. But let's just try to run our code first. So I'm going to write here node. Then this file, I call it flow.js, and you can see it gives the student an F because 54 does not meet any of these conditions. So it falls to the else block. So whenever you're writing this sort of decision statements, you need to always write the most specific and the highest priority checks first. What you mean by this is, for example, 90 is the highest priority. So we have this first, followed by the second highest priority, followed by a third, like that, as you go down. The mistake that you can make if this condition is the one that is a condition of a lower priority comes first, then it basically sort of nullifies all the other conditions in a way, because whenever you have the highest priority first, then you can be able to keep your condition between those margins. So for example, when we use this second else if and we say the score is greater than or equal to 75, then because we started with 90, this means that it's going to be bound between 75 and in this case 89, right? The same case happened to 60. It's going to be bound between 60 and 74. Then like that. So that is why it is really, really important to make sure that you write the most specific and the highest priority checks first, then the rest of the others follow there. Now, the other main thing to note here is whenever you're doing comparisons, you need to make sure that you do strict comparison, right? We talked about the issue of type coercion. Type coercion can happen whenever you're trying to do comparisons, for example, between strings and numbers, but numbers that are maybe strings, that sort of thing. In that case, you need to use a strict comparisons. For example, in this case, it's because we're doing this greater than, less than, and everything. But if we're using, let's say, triple equal sign, so to just make sure the score is exactly equivalent to this other score, then we have to use strict equality. If we are trying to use not, the exclamation is for not equal, then we have to do that. But let's just have it back to the original state that it was. So that is this is really, really important to just note whenever you're working with decision statements in JavaScript. Now, we went ahead and just started writing, if, else, if, and everything. The other thing that you can do is you can always just have an if and an else alone, right? So in this case, you can have something like if, like that. If the student score is, let's say, like that, if the student score is greater than 90, then you give them an A, else you just give them an F. You can also just have it like this, right? Then if you change this to square and have it like 100, then the student is going to receive an A. So you can always just have an if and an else alone. But when you have multiple conditions like we had before, like this, then in this case, you need to have your else ifs to make sure that they fit all the sort of conditions that you had set in the beginning as you're starting to write your program. Now, a challenge that you can take from here is you can check what we wrote in the switch case, just to refer to what we wrote on the switch case. We talked about we used the score, the same grading program that we've just written, but you can also go ahead and look at all these other programs, like where you use multiple cases. In this case, we're using fruit and then trying to check whether something is a fruit or a fruit or a berry, all these things. So in this case, you need to also just try to convert this using just a simple if and else if. And also we wrote on all these other programs. So please refer to this and just try to rewrite everything here. Now, something to note here is that whenever you're using if and else if statements, you don't have an option but to make sure that you take care of every condition together. So it's not the same as in this case. When you're talking about switch case, we said that whenever you have cases in different cases that give the same result, then we can be able to just group all of them together like this. That is not usually the case whenever you're using if and else if. So in this case, in if and else if, each of the cases that you have will have to be written separately, right? So this is just one of the main differences that I'd like for you to note here. Now that we understand all this, this is just the basic flow. I think one other thing that I have to mention, or one extra thing I have to mention here, is when you're talking about conditions, right? There's also a case whereby you can be able to combine your conditions, right? You don't have to just have them like this. You can always combine the conditions. For example, you can have, let's say, the score, right? The score is 54. Then you can have another variable here. Let's call this variable is student. Then this is going to be a boolean. So let's say student is true, like that. Then this is another condition that you have to consider. So what you consider here is whether the student has meets a specific score, but also on top of that, you need to confirm that the student, or rather this person whose score you have, is a student either within your institution or just a student in general. So you can use this is student. We can just add this is student here. So you can come here and say, you can say if score is that, then to say an end, here we use the logical end that we talked about. So I'll just say logical end like that. Then if the score is greater than or equal to 90 and is student, we can just basically have it like this. If this is the case, then you can give the student an A, right? Then you can also have do the same across everything here. You can also, for example, if you have a case whereby you're dealing with parental consent in certain cases, let's say you are trying to write a simple program for students to go on a trip, whether they're allowed to go on a trip, whether their parents have signed the consent and all those things. You can be able to have multiple conditions basically combined like this, right? So in this case, this is strict comparison, right? As you can see here, this is just strict comparison. Remember, you can also use the logical or, where in case of, instead of using and, you basically use the straight lines. So it's going to be either of these conditions have to be met, not only one, right? But I think in this case, the and just fits better in the program. So if you have here, let's say we have that the student is the student scored 90. We run this, you see, we get an A, right? But if we change this to false, I'm going to just change this to false, then the student still scored 90. But let's run our code and see. As you can see, the student is given a B instead of an A. The reason for that is because the student, yes, scored 90, this person scored 90, but they're not a student in this case because his student is false. So that means this condition fails, and then it trickles down to this other part. Now, I'm sure you can already see a loophole in this case, because you only expect someone who's going to get a B to be someone who has scored 70 between 75 and 90. So how you get rid of that is you also have to add the same sort of check here. So I'm going to just copy this, and then I'm going to have it across everything else here, just so that that trickle down that we've seen there doesn't happen in all the other programs. So right now, if we run this again, we see it tells us that this is an F, right? Now the other thing you can do here, you can say you can just say F or not a student. So you run this again, then you can see it says F or not a student. But in this case now, we've gotten rid of the trickle down that was happening whenever these conditions were happening, as we've seen them there. So you can always combine your conditions whenever you're dealing with if statements. The other thing you can always do is you can use parentheses whenever you are making explicit sort of conditions. So, for example, you have, let me just show you an example here. So, let's say you have score, you have student. Let's say you are just working within a system for managing student results and all that. So, you need to have some sort of roles, right? You have roles within the system. And then their role could be student, teacher, admin, manager, all that. Then I'm just going to create a role of admin for now, right? So you can have something like this. Then you can say if the score is this. But the other thing that you have to confirm here is let's say the only person who is allowed to assign a score is someone who is an admin, right? So you can also do a sort of an extension of this. You can just say if role has to be admin, right? So remember, in this case, we said that we have to use strict equality to avoid type coercion. So in this case, if role is, then we say admin. But remember, all these other conditions still have to be met, right? So you can say if role is admin, in this case, role could also be another role. So let's say an admin or a teacher is the one who is allowed to do that. Then you need to have an or here. Then you can also just say if the role is either admin or role is, should be strict. If the role is admin or teacher, teacher, like that, if this is the role. But now what you'll notice is that there's going to be a disconnect between everything, because this is a separate set of rules that you have to take care of, and also this is another separate set of rules. So what you do is to just differentiate everything. You have both of them in parentheses. You can have this in enclosed in parentheses, like that. So you can say if the role of the role is this, and something like that, should be an end here. If that is the role, and the score of the student is 90, and this, I know this sort of might not sort of make some sense, but I believe it does in this case. You need to make sure that the role of the person who is logging into the system is either an admin or a teacher, so they can be able to assign us a score. Then when they assign the score, they have to assign the score, and then also at the same time confirm that this person they're assigning the score to is a student. So in this case, what you can also do is you can still enclose everything else here. The second, because we have multiple of this, you can also enclose them in parentheses, like that. So in this case, we've used parentheses to make an explicit order of all these conditions that have to be met for a student to be assigned a grade. Right. So again, just take it on and apply it somewhere else. For example, just think of simple someone logging into a system. For someone to log into a system, you have to of course you have to confirm their credentials, but once they log in, you have to confirm that either this person is a manager. Just it's called role based access control. So you have to assign them what they can only be able to access within the system based on their roles. So in that case, you need to have multiple of these conditions. For example, you confirm the role, then on top of that, you confirm that the person has logged in first, then the role. Then you give them a condition on what they need to be assigned. I do hope this makes sense. I don't want to write a really complex program right now, but I do believe this already makes sense as we're doing it. So you can also write like nested if statements as well, where you have an if statement like this, but also once that if statement has been met, you also have another if statement also nested, the same way we were nesting the switch case as well here. So you can also try that. I'll leave it to you to just try out and see whether you're able to nest this if statements. But if you do have a question, do let me know in the comments below, and I'll jump on it and make sure that I answer it. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a task. So the task I'm going to give you today is going to be, it's going to be a program that checks for loan eligibility of someone applying for a loan. I'm going to leave it to you to just be more creative on how you're going to do this, but I'll just type it here. Just say, right, I'll just write it as JS, a JS program that determines, let's say determines whether it's a whether someone's loan application should be approved or be put under review or should be rejected. Basically, the loan approval process. So this is what you need to do. So you have to do is based on a number of rules. Right? So I'll just say based on number of a number of rules that you will determine. Okay, I'll just say you'll decide, something like that. So I need to just be free on this, but here's the solution that we're going to use here. I'll just say your solution must use. I'll make, you can use nested if statements if you'd like to. I'm not going to be a bit more strict on that, but I'll just mainly it must use combined. It's a combined conditions. So when talk about combined conditions, I'm talking about using the logical and the logical or, like that. So just say with and, like that, and the or, like these two. These are the main things that I want you to just try and use in your program. So implement the program using the if and else if also, once you're done, you can also try to implement a similar program using switch case. Now, when you're doing your research on this program, you're going to notice that there are certain solutions that are a bit easier because using certain concepts that we have not covered, but we're going to cover those concepts as we proceed. So happy coding.